Joining the program now is Marc Faber. He is the publisher of the Gloom, Doom, and Boom report. Marc, welcome to the show.
My pleasure.
So
Peter.
Which is it, gloom or doom or boom?
Well, depends on which asset class and on which region in the world, and also the time frame. We could have a boom first and then a bust, or a bust first and then a boom, who knows. But clearly markets will continue to fluctuate widely. I think that volatility will increase. And if we just look at the performance since 2009, the S&P has more than doubled. Thailand, the Philippines, Indonesia are up by more than 250%. And European markets reached 4 months ago lows that were equivalent to the 2009 lows or lower. In other words, S&P 666. So you have widely diverging performance in Asia. Also, some markets are up, as I said, 250%. And China peaked out at 6,000 in 2007, and we're now at 6,000 in 2007, and we're now at 2,000.
Yeah, so I just said Robert Prechter was just on, and he's he's saying that he thinks the markets have clearly topped out, but he's actually thinking the Dow is going to drop 90% in dollar terms, not in real terms like gold terms, but in dollar terms, because he thinks that the Fed is not going to be able to print enough money to hold off the deflationary forces. Do you think there's any chance he's right?
Well, my view is that one day there will be the final crisis when the system implodes and everything will collapse in value, because every inflation is followed by deflation. So in the last, say, 10 years, we didn't have very high consumer price inflation, although it was higher than what the Bureau of Labor Statistics published in terms of statistics. I would think that inflation for most people runs between 5 and 10% per annum. It's like your brother, he says, at $500,000 salary in New York City doesn't live a good life. He may be right. And so I think what they will do is continue to print money globally, all the central banks, and in real terms, the Dow is already down 80% against the price of gold. So I don't see the Dow now declining by 90%. But in 5 or 10 years' time, when the inflation in asset prices will have driven asset prices either higher or sidewards, I think we can have an implosion for a variety of reasons.
But an implosion from where we are now or from a higher level than where we are now?
Well, that we'll have to see. My view was for the last few weeks that we made a top in stock markets, and that we will go down a minimum of 20%. And then we will have to reappraise the situation in terms of how does the economy hold up, what are the earnings picture in terms of are they going to go down meaningfully, because this has been proven now by various publications and economists. The interventions with fiscal and monetary policies have not smoothened out economic activity, but made it more volatile.
Do you think, if you look at the situation in the Eurozone versus the United States, which region do you think fundamentally, from an economic perspective, actually faces a bigger challenge? Is it more trouble? Is it Europe or the United States?
Well, the difference is that Spain and Greece can only print money to a very limited extent. To some extent they can, but very limited. Whereas the U.S. can endlessly print money, which could lead to severe dollar weakness over time. Now, for the next couple of months, I think the U.S. dollar will strengthen, not because anything is particularly favorable in the U.S., but we have even worse conditions in Europe. There's one point I'd like to make. and it's not necessarily my view. A lot of intelligent people, some with self-interest, some with less self-interest, they believe that natural gas and the increase in oil production in the U.S. is a game changer. I don't believe that it's such a huge game changer, but it could improve the trade deficit of the U.S., the current account deficit, and it could create kind of a dollar shortage in an environment in which the dollar would strengthen, and that would extend the lease of life of the U.S. government to borrow more and more money.
Well, I would agree that the fact that we have more oil and gas and we can export more is a net positive as opposed to where we would be if we didn't have the extra
Correct.
exports. But it is still not overshadowing. The trade deficit is still rising right now, despite the fact that we have the help of oil. The trade deficit is still growing.
Yes, and this is why I'm very skeptical about the game-changing nature of natural gas and of increased oil production. Look, I just came into New York 3 days ago. At immigration, I had to wait 2.5 hours to get through immigration. It took me 3 hours to get out of the airport. Do you think that natural gas and oil will change any of that? The U.S. suffers, like most Western democracies, from an oversized government bureaucracy. And, people talk about easy monetary policies, expansionary fiscal policies. Yes, in theory, they could act as a stimulus for the economy, in theory. In practice, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and Mark, when you think about all the money and time that we now waste on airport security, a decade ago or before 9/11, the economy didn't have to worry about absorbing that cost. All those, so it's so much more difficult now for the U.S. economy to function because we're weighed down by so much useless regulation that costs money and wastes our time.
Precisely, and you are a businessman. You know how regulation makes it difficult for you to do anything. And all my friends who have small businesses in the U.S., they have maybe 20 employees, 30 employees. They themselves are independently well-to-do. They have no appetite whatsoever to hire anyone. They don't want to hire new people because they don't know what the regulation will be next year. And the business outlook is highly uncertain. The cost of doing business, they know, will only go up because the more they pay taxes to the government, the more the government has employees to bother them and give them a hard time with regulation.
Yeah, and the more employees they have, the more liability they have. The greater the chance that one of their employees is going to file a lawsuit.
Absolutely. But my point about Procter is, I think eventually the tsunami will come as a result of the unfunded liabilities in the United States, which is not talked about much, but is a real threat.
Well, we got a break coming up, and Procter's basically saying the government's just going to default and not pay any of those liabilities. And we could talk about that. We got a commercial, but we'll continue with this on the other side of the break. We're talking to Marc Faber of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom Report. More of this interview straight ahead, so don't go away.
But
The Peter Schiff Show.
I'm feeling kind of cold inside. I'm not sure if you can tell. I close my eyes.
We now return to the Peter Schiff Show.
Call in now, 855-4-SCHIFF.
That's 855-472-4433.
Rebel Radio.
The Peter Schiff Show.
And we are talking live from New Orleans, Louisiana, with editor of the Gloom, Doom, and Boom Report, Marc Faber. And earlier in the show, when I had Robert Procter on, and I brought up the topic of government's liabilities, its bonded liabilities and all of its unfunded liabilities, which both Procter and I agree are enormous and beyond the scope of the government's ability to legitimately repay. Robert thought that the government would simply default, that it would just stop sending out the Social Security checks, let the student loans go into default, and not honor its commitments. What do you think about the government? What is it going to do with its liabilities, both funded and unfunded? Is it going to default, or can they print?
I very much doubt that the default will happen for the time being, because as long as the U.S. can sustain essentially deficits of over $1 trillion and monetize, say, 60-70% of these deficits, they'll do that. Moreover,